Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right. No more football for 30 minutes. No more talking football for 30 minutes. Because of the gospel meeting last week that we had, which was very good and very uplifting, we did not do lesson 4. And this week, right now, we're supposed to be on lesson 5. Lesson 5 is later Hebrew history. Well, lesson 4 was early Hebrew history. So once again, I'm like, how can we do later Hebrew history without doing early Hebrew history? So we are going to try to blast. First off, what do we mean when we say Hebrew? Jewish, simple as that. Yes. Some definitions straight from books. The first person to be called Hebrew was Abraham, and the name commonly refers to his descendants, known as the Jewish people. As a noun, Hebrew is a member of an ancient people living in what is now Israel and Palestine, descended from the patriarch Jacob, son of Isaac, grandson of Abraham. After Exodus, they established the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and their scriptures and traditions form the basis of the Jewish religion. Hebrew language is the language of the Hebrews. So that's book definitions. What's the genealogy Abraham, starting at Abraham? Who begat who? Who was whose father? Who was, and all that? Who knows that off the top of their head?
Yeah. Isaac.
Jacob.
Esau. After that, Jacob's 12
Yeah, Jacob's 12 children. So the 12 tribes, exactly. So to get to later Hebrew history, we have to know early Hebrew history. The genealogy is such as Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, then the 12 patriarchs. Exodus 3:6, as well as in Acts 7:32. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. The word patriarch means what? Father. I was reading the definition. Told Heather, I said, no, the word patriarch means a progenitor. She said, why you got to use a big word? I said, a progenitor. I said, a father. So the originator of a line of descent. Abraham being the patriarch, and then on and on and on. Then we have the 12 patriarchs, are the 12 sons of Jacob. Yes. A few verses. Genesis 35:22 through 26. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Ishtar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. The sons of Beli, Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, Gad, and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan Aram. So that's what we mean when we're talking Hebrew. So both of these studies this morning are early Hebrew history and later Hebrew history are from the book of Acts. Lesson 4, early Hebrew history, that's Acts chapter 7. And we're going to do verses 1 through 34. Acts was written by who? Luke. What did Luke do? Yes. And he was also a Gentile. So this is Luke's account from the book of Acts. Luke is giving an account of, here, chapter 7, Luke is giving an account of early Hebrews history in super short, almost Cliff Notes version. For those not familiar with Cliff Notes, that's what we used in high school and college when we didn't want to read the long book, and the teachers always knew when we read the Cliff Notes. I mean, they did. Yeah, because the teachers read the books. So there's lots of stuff Cliff Notes left out. That being said, he was hitting the high points, and I'm going to try to summarize that. So we're really shortening this and distilling it.
Colin,
Yes, sir.
you know what the teachers knew when you done that? Because they done did it for 20 years.
Yes.
They already knew it. They know when you shot them, you know.
Yes, they knew every bit of that. And that's some of what we're going to see, the story behind the story in these verses. we're going to see what happens when people knew the truth and didn't want to admit it. We're going to see that coming up. Very true. In chapter 7, the thing we need to remember is that these weren't so much the words of Luke, but the words of Stephen. Yes, Luke wrote this in the book of Acts, but Stephen was giving this history lesson or this account to who?
The men who were killing, actually.
Mm-hmm. The Sanhedrin. Who was the Sanhedrin?
High court.
Yes, the high court, the council. If you look up Sanhedrin, it'll say look up council. Council, the highest court of the Jewish nation. So they must have been good people, right?
Just like ours are.
They wanted to be technically right and stay in power is what we see going. What did the Sanhedrin do? Among, not even including this. What else are they responsible for?
Crucifixion.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say responsible for, but they played a part in it.
Big hand.
Mm-hmm. This is the same Sanhedrin that accused Jesus of blasphemy against God, brought him before Pilate, had him scourged, had him beaten, had him crucified on the cross. Same Sanhedrin. These are the same people that also brought charges against Peter, John, and the other apostles. Same people who brought charges against Paul. Same people. So Stephen is giving this account to the Sanhedrin. As Ms. Pat said, what do we know happened to Stephen for doing this? He was executed by stoning. For giving an account of the history of the Jewish people, where he also accused the Sanhedrin of rejecting God's messengers and disobeying God's commands. They executed him. So let's remember that part when we're studying Old Testament histories and genealogies and these verses this morning. Just an aside, Brother Wiley said this before, and it rings true. Lots of times when you tell the truth, it makes people mad. Really mad, especially when it challenges their mindset, belief, or authority in a situation. In Stephen's case, it made the people mad enough to have him executed. Now, knowing the Sanhedrin's history and what they had already done, was it likely that Stephen knew what would happen to him?
Good possibility.
Very good possibility. Did it stop him? No. Because he said it to him. Did it stop Luke from writing it in the book of Acts? No. So the point is, if it was important enough to die for, we should study it. And have the strength and the wherewithal enough to be able to repeat it when people ask.
You know, Colin, too, also, that what happened to John, too.
Yes. There are many cases in the Bible of just that same thing happening. Very true. Anyone else before we hit the high points on early Hebrew history? Lesson 4 is broken down into 3 sections. Abraham, Jacob, and Moses. Abraham's verses 1 through 8. So, once again, Stephen's account. Stephen begins at the beginning of the genealogy with Abraham and tells how God appeared to Abraham while he was still in what country? Mesopotamia. Then he tells how God directed Abraham to a land that he would show him. Then how Abraham had no child. How old was Abraham and how old was his wife? Oh. And she was beyond the age of what? Childbearing. So she was too old to even have children, so she thought. God granted them one. His name was what? Jacob. Isaac. Messing me up here. Isaac. And told him, you will be granted many descendants. How many?
More than 3 descendants.
More than grains of sand on the sea and more than stars in the sky. That's a lot. We have to keep in mind, it's this way even now, that people are, your children are your legacy, even more so back then. And to be told that was, especially at their age, it was very good for him to hear. Then he said how his descendants would be put into bondage for 400 years. Then how God would judge those who put his people into bondage. Who put their people into bondage?
Themselves did.
Yeah, true. But I mean, who were they in bondage to? Egypt. What judgment is he talking about? Upon Egypt. The plagues. Yes, then how Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. Section 2 was verses 7 through 16. The book titles it The Patriarchs in Egypt. Patriarchs were envious of who? And sold them into slavery in Egypt. Who were they envious of? Joseph. They were mad. Didn't like Joseph. But God was with Joseph. He was second only to who?
The Pharaoh.
The Pharaoh. What did he do for the Pharaoh?
He
Interpreted dreams.
accounted for everything that
Yeah.
they had in Egypt.
But he interpreted dreams. And then that got him, helped him get to his position. And that was all part of God's grand design. What did he tell Pharaoh to build?
Warehouses.
For what?
Grain over the grain. Because of the coming famine.
Because of the coming famine. Yes. So a great famine came, and Joseph's family, who sold him into slavery, came to Egypt. From where? Somewhere other than Egypt, where the famine was. Egypt had food, so everybody came to Egypt for food. And they just so happened to bump into Joseph. Joseph then sent for his entire family, and later Jacob died and was buried in the land of Shechem, if I'm pronouncing that right. Moses, third section, is verses 17 through 34. We're also titled God Delivers Israel, and Israel is who?
The Hebrew people.
The Hebrew people. God delivers Israel, or the Hebrew people, by Moses. Stephen goes on and talks about how the Hebrew people grew and multiplied in Egypt, just as who had promised Abraham? God. God promised them that. They grew in number and multiplied so much that what happened? Who took notice?
Egypt.
The Pharaoh.
The Pharaoh. He looked around and quickly realized that there were enough Jews to take over in his mind. Once again, we see people trying to hang on to power and scared for their power. So, what did the king do? Or the new king Pharaoh? Yes. This was a new king, new Pharaoh in Egypt that, quote, did not know Joseph and, quote, dealt treacherously with the Jews. He killed the firstborn. He enslaved them. Sounds like what God promised to Abraham was going to happen. During this time, Moses was born and was found well-pleasing to God. He was placed in a basket, and he drifted up to whose house? How unlikely is that?
The daughter of the king.
Yes, she is the one who found him. And he was taken in and raised and brought up in whose house? The Pharaoh's house. What did that mean, because he was brought up in the Pharaoh's house?
He knew both cultures
Yes,
very well.
very educated. He was well looked after, very well. There was nothing that was not afforded to him.
His mother was with him, so you know she slid in what she could.
He was, quote, mighty in words and deeds in the Egyptian people. Now, remember that, how he was mighty in words and deeds. And when you think about what happened in the second part of his life, like, woo, it's kind of funny. But the point is, he was in a position of strength, power, knowledge, etc. How old was Moses when he visited his people?
40.
40. I'm 34. I'm 34. I'm about to be 35. 5 more years before he just said, wow, and just looked around. Now, either he'd been in the palace and never gotten outside the palace, who knows, but it took him that long to realize this isn't right. But once again, God's design. At 40 years old, he visited his people, saw their suffering, and at the mistreatment of an Egyptian towards a Jew, what did Moses do? Killed him. He struck and killed the Egyptian. What happened then?
He ran.
He ran. Moses fled. I mean, the only thing he had known was Pharaoh's house. Where did he go? Desert, to the land of Midian. In my mind, that's kind of like, if all you know is some big city named New York and Washington, D.C., that is all you know. It's all you've been in your entire life for 40 years. And you've had everything just given to you. And you do something terrible and you run out to the woods.
Medea may have been one of those cities of refuge that were set up. I don't know if it was, but it may have been.
I don't think so. No, I mean, he fled. He went from apples to oranges. Is what we're getting at. Good point, though. So, how long was he there before something happened to him again?
40 years.
40 years. These numbers keep on popping up, don't they? And what happened after 40 years, after he had a wife, 2 children? Things
God
that
called him in a burning bush.
Yes. An angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a flame of fire in a bush. The Lord spoke to Moses and told, well, what did he tell him when Moses came upon the burning bush that was not consumed by fire? You are on holy ground. Yes. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and told of how through him God would deliver his people. Now, back up a little bit. When Moses was mighty in word and deed in the eyes of the Egyptian people, fast forward to when God was having him do his will. And remember how there was time, God, I can't do this, I can't speak. I'll have people speak for you. Did something like that just happen? He was scared to do what he knew to be the right thing. Yes, sir.
Well, he was wanting to get out of it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's like us. We know there's something we need to do. We try to find every reason not to do.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually you got to make a choice.
Why John going to Nineveh?
Exactly. We know it's the right thing.
You usually find a whole bunch of reasons, but eventually you run out of reasons.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. You just run out at the end of the day.
You don't run out of that right thing to do. You know,
That's very true. You never run out of
it
that.
ain't gonna leave no matter how many things you find to put in its way. You're gonna run out of excuses, and this still gonna be standing there waiting.
Yep. And the omniscient God, who has always been and always will be, is still sitting there waiting. Lesson number 5, real fast. Later Hebrew history. That is Acts chapter 13, 16 through 41. Here the author of Acts, who is Luke, gives his account of Paul speaking in the synagogue at the city of Antioch. Here the rulers of the synagogue asked Paul and those with him if he had anything to say. What did Paul say? No, I'm not going to talk about God. Well, exactly.
Like asking Gus Nichols if he had anything.
Yeah, do you have any opinions on this? Paul did not let that opportunity pass him by. Introduction on verses 16 through 20. Paul addressed them, it's important, Paul addressed the people in the synagogue as men of Israel and those who fear God. Men of Israel, so we said Israel is what? Jews, Hebrews, men of Israel and those who fear God. That sounds kind of like Jew first, didn't it, Greek? He gives a bit of history on when the Jews were under Egyptian captivity and how God brought them out of it. He spoke about their how many years in the wilderness? 40. 40 years in the wilderness. And how when God had destroyed 7 nations that were in the land of Canaan, God gave the land back to them. Then the time of Judges until Samuel the prophet. First section of text in lesson number 4 was John the Baptizer, is what it's titled in our study guide. That's verses 21 through 25. The Hebrews asked for a king, and God gave them who? Saul. For how long? Easy.
40 years.
40 years.
40 years.
For 40 years. After God removed Saul, they got King who? David. Who was known as what?
Friend of God.
Friend of God, a man after God's own heart. One who would do God's will. From David's this is continuing on from David's seed, according to the promise given by God, God raised up a Savior for Israel for the Hebrews, and that was and is who? Jesus, of course. Then he tells of John the Baptist, who came before Jesus and taught of baptism of repentance. Towards the end, as John's work came to an end, how did John the Baptist die?
Yeah.
Bring me John the Baptist's head on a plate. He was beheaded. Did it stop him? When they had him in prison? No, didn't stop him. Towards the end of his work, he said, "There comes one after me, the sandals of whose feet," what? "I'm not worthy to loose." Takes us to section 2. And that person was, of course, Jesus. That's verses 26 through 31. Here Paul readdresses those in the synagogue as brethren, as sons of Abraham, and those that fear God. He declares that the prophecies have been fulfilled in Jesus, that it was made known to those in Jerusalem and to the rulers, which were who? Who did we talk about earlier? The Sanhedrin, correct. And how they did not know Jesus or the words of the prophet. He stood up in a synagogue and said that. He said also that not only that, but how they condemned Jesus, and though without cause, how they asked Pilate for the death of Jesus, got it, and had Jesus put in a tomb, quote, "But God raised him from the dead." Remember what happened to Stephen before the Sanhedrin, and how he did it knowing full well, very likely, that that's what was going to happen to him. He was probably going to be killed for this. Paul stood up before in front of a synagogue. Did it stop him from mincing words? No. Section number 3, the gospel. That was verses 32 through 41. Oh, that's my last page. The gospel. So, Paul says how Jesus was risen and was seen about for many days, not just one, many days. Paul declared good tidings that promise which was made to the fathers. God fulfilled his promise from years past to his people. The promise and the promises were filled going all the way back to the beginning in who? In Jesus, who fulfilled everything. Jesus. He also said how God would not allow his Holy One to see what? Corruption. It's often said that, where's Muhammad? Where's Buddha? They're in the ground. They're dead, rotten. Jesus did not see corruption. He even brings up David, as we remember, who served God, who was a great king, was buried and saw corruption. But who did not see corruption? Jesus. Things to remember. That is as fast as I can go through 2 lessons. Things to remember. The Old Testament, the Old Law, everything before the death, burial, and resurrection looks towards the cross. Everything was looking for things to come, for the fulfillment of promise and the prophecy. New Testament, everything after the death, burial, and resurrection looks back to the cross. Something popped in my head constantly. There are people that try to test the Bible, that try to either just deny it or they bring science into it. I love watching History Channel when they do these shows. I love it. And they try to disprove all these things. Well, it's a scientific theory, I suppose, or the scientific way you try to disprove something. And every time they're like, well, it could have been this. It could have been that. They never come up with it. Constantly, there are people that try to test the Bible to show that it's wrong or untrue or false, or try to come up with another explanation other than that 3-letter word, which is God.
Want to get some good ones, just post something about evolution in your Facebook.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's where we're at right now.
Or reformation.
That's more information.
The funny thing about evolution is there's a word in front of it that's just been dropped.
Theory of.
Theory. It's the theory of evolution, but now it's just called evolution. Apparently it's that old adage or saying that if you say something long enough and loud enough, it doesn't matter if it's true or false, it becomes true. That's not the case. Like I said, people ever try to show that the Bible's untrue, wrong, false, or just denying power, and they're ever made wrong, ever proven wrong. What else does anyone have? We have just a few minutes. I didn't cover it that well.
All I know is, if we go out to talk to somebody or start to talk to somebody about that, they start getting mad, we back away. We look at the lesson. Stephen knew odds are he did. He didn't shut up, he kept going.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like we need to learn something.
We don't need to be abrasive and to be in people's faces about it, but when they ask, we don't need to hem-haw around or beat around the bush or say, well, I think. I often say I think, and I've changed my I think to, well, I know. And then people get into that, well, you can't know something. Yes, I can. And that's how people say, well, that's your opinion. It's not your opinion. The Bible is fact. And that's the beauty of the Bible. We don't have to have strength in of ourselves on certain things because the Bible is strong for us.
It's just like I put on the sign I did this week. You think about it. Bottom line of it says, only he never lies. I mean, we can sit here and I think we're all, as long as we're coming with it, ain't no lies in that thing.
Well, there's the Bible isn't being revised. It's not about, you know what I mean. People are trying to change this word for that word, but I'm talking about people aren't going back in and making amendments to it, scratching through. Well, no. God isn't, at least. Let me start all over.
Man might do that.
Man might do that, but God is not, because it is complete. Quickly, yes, ma'am.
It makes me think about how God knows everything and how He has a plan and He is working it out. Even though we live day by day, we look back through the whole Hebrew history and see how Jesus came at the end of that. And He knew exactly what he was doing every day.
Yes. And that's
We
a,
get impatient.
but that's a beautiful thought, and there's comfort in that. All things work towards good for who?
Those that love the Lord,
Those that love the Lord. If you love the Lord, what do?
obey Him.
You obey Him. You keep His commandments. So that's what we're all here for, to learn what His commandments are and to keep them. How does Paul's sermon in this chapter differ from Stephen's sermon in Acts 7? How are the two similar? This was shorter than Stephen's. But how are they similar? We talked about that. Neither one of them were afraid to get up there and say,
Both have history. One includes the Gentiles by name. Stephen's, I don't think, did, not by name.
Stephen was addressing them. So that's something else. Stephen was addressing the Sanhedrin directly, and Paul was kind of almost kicked the dust off his feet and was like, we're not even going to go through them anymore because they're a lost cause. Why do you think Paul mentioned the work of John the Baptizer in this sermon? Part of something you're supposed to know. It happened.
He baptized Jesus.
Kind of important.
Yeah, very important.
Kind of important.
Which is our role model.
Yeah. And how people can say that baptism isn't essential to salvation. Ask them, didn't Jesus get baptized? What does Acts 13:29 teach us about God's ultimate plan for man's salvation? Acts 13:29.
They may have buried him, but they didn't keep him in there.
Yep. As we've said, God's plan is going to happen. You're not going to stop it. There's a lot of people that Pharaoh's like, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to do this. I mean, there's all through history that people are like, you're not going to stop it. There've been plenty of movies about that. The Devil's Advocate was one at the very end. One of the characters said, I've read the book. We lose. You're not going to stop it. Why do you think Paul concluded his sermon with a warning from Habakkuk? That's Acts verses 40 through 41. That was, beware therefore lest what has been spoken in the prophets come upon you. Behold, your despisers marvel and perish, for I work a work in your days, a work which you will by no means believe, though one were to declare it to you.
That we're not accepting Jesus. He was warning them about that.
Yeah,
Specifically.
he was speaking in the synagogue. And last question, why do you think Paul spent time discussing the history of the Jews rather than simply speaking about Jesus?
Maybe he was appealing to their baser nature. You know, they were proud to be Jews.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to have commonality with people before you can just bust in the door. You don't do that with door knocking. You don't door knock and if it's on a Sunday morning and you realize that they've been watching football all morning, you don't knock on the door and say, you weren't in church this morning. You don't do that. You knock on the door and say, can I talk to you a little bit? And have to find some commonality and talk to them. Simple as that. What else is in that?
Colin, I was like, just say something. You know, speak on the 40 years. Go mission it 3 times, I think, in our study. And this shows that God is patient. And the way He do things is not the way we see things done a lot of times.
Yes.
And a lot of times we want to help them out.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to give, I look at myself and other people that saw obeyed. Sometimes you have to give people time.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you teach them the gospel all right, let's go to the water. It ain't gonna happen that way all the time. Sometimes it might.
Yeah.
But, you know, people have to think about it. And it is a lot different when someone is brought up in the church and someone is not, because you've been a part of this all your life, something else, and somebody telling you now, hey, you're wrong, you gotta make a change. And sometimes you need time to think about it.
Yeah, it's a jagged pill to swallow sometimes for some people, and everybody's different. You're right, God's time is not our time. 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is 1,000 years to Jesus, but to us, it's like, hurry up. We're in a hurry up society.
You good every time now, why don't you go ahead on?
Yeah. Hurry up and do it. Next week, God's plan to save man. That's lesson number 6. I believe Brother Wiley's going to have that. Thank you all this morning.